track to be the same, especially with this next conversation. I'm very excited for it. Aidan Larkin from Wilson's Auctions, making crime pay, managing and realising seized crypto assets. Isn't that quite a title? I can already tell how interesting this is going to be based on the title alone. So make sure to share on social media anything that is impactful to you using the hashtag DDNA2019. Stage is yours.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy.
For the kind words. Yeah, we like a lot of words in the auction industry, so my business card is about this size. It's like a bloody A1. You're probably wondering, why are we here? Why is an auction company here to speak to you at such a sort of prestigious tech event? And I'm going to take you through effectively our journey. We're going to talk about managing and realising seized crypto assets, but really the wider story is terms of innovation. It's the customer. We've just seen in the news about Facebook introducing cryptocurrency. We've been talking for quite a long time about the mainstream adoption. I regularly tweet and talk about things when we see Samsung bringing in a patent or MasterCard using a patent for blockchain. And we're involved in that in much more of a spectrum than you may be aware of. So this is a bit of an overview as to what we're doing in this sphere, what we've been involved in, and also to give you our journey. We're a Northern Irish company. We're proud of our roots. We don't forget that, despite the fact that we're now operating on an international stage. And how did we bridge the gap? A lot of startups, you read the sort of cliched stats, about 90% of startups sort of fail to get off the ground. And you're starting with a blank slate. You're starting with misconceptions. You have to build trust, for example. But in our industry, I actually think we have an even bigger challenge, because if you say the word auction, this is what everybody thinks. That I'm sort of David Dickinson's love child, nearly have a pinstripe suit. And that's what you hear. I remember saying to my dear old granny before she passed away, I'm joining an auction company. Oh, that's nice. Look out for some antiques for me. But it's not about that. This is how I spent last week, for example, in an investigating cryptocurrency course run by a guy called Nick Furno. And we were looking at sort of blockchain transactions around the world, and in an insolvency situation, for example, if crypto assets are seized, how do you trace the crypto assets? How do you use the information that's on blockchain and not get lost along the way? So it's a completely different world from what we're used to do. So I'm going to give you a bit about my background, the company's background, and how we're in this sphere, and hopefully help sort of share our experiences. I'm the Asset Recovery Director. We manage assets all around the world. Some of you locally may know our auctions for sort of the Rolexes and the Ferraris and the Lamborghinis. We also sell for some of the biggest manufacturers in the world. We deal with assets basically at its core. We're headquartered in Belfast, but we're now spread across the UK and Ireland. I'm previously a criminal tax inspector. Don't cheer, everybody's friend who loves paying tax. And also, we're really going to talk today about the world's first auction of seized crypto assets. It's been done before by other government agencies, but never before has a private sector company bridged that gap and sold crypto assets to the general public. So we'll talk to you a bit about that as well. And that wasn't actually meant to be included, but it is true. I did finish runner-up, and the marketing department told me to say something nice about myself. So what is Wilson's Auctions? Who are Wilson's Auctions? There's no point in me talking to you about crypto assets and what we do without having a sort of basis in who we are. And as you can see, and our guys are outside, obviously the big TV, we're sort of dominating the stand outside. Come out and speak to us if you have any questions afterwards, because I appreciate we're quite tight for time. But we sell assets all around the world, and we have the conundrum of how do we take Mr. and Mrs. Jones who buy houses and buy cars and bring them into the fear of crypto assets when we hear all of these scary stories, even the words, so darknet and hackers, and people are terrified. But now with Facebook coming on board, you'll have more of a mainstream adoption of crypto assets. That's certainly our opinion on things. And we're seeing more and more events. We're talking to insolvency practitioners, we're talking to lawyers, because it will be the future in terms of, in 15, 20 years, an average probate solicitor will be dealing with crypto assets when they're distributing the estate, for example. So how do we take what is a traditional company with very sort of firm traditional roots in the old-fashioned buying and selling of goods and actually try and bring people across to deal with crypto assets? And how did we do that as a company? Well, we already talked about the fact that we sell various categories of assets, and how do we use that to our advantage to sort of show people that we're a company, we're walking into an insurance company saying, we can actually deal with your seized crypto assets, and they're saying, well, aren't you the people that sell cars? Aren't you the people that sell houses? How do you translate your corporate message to try and reassure people and say, well, actually, we have a firm foundation. This isn't about demonstrating sort of technical expertise. It's about demonstrating what your accreditations are, what your awards are, and how do you translate and actually bridge that gap, and looking at the person behind the decision. I think so many people enter into tenders and procurement exercises, and they're trying to convince them that they're the best person for the job. And it's the Henry Ford quote about, if I listened to my customers, they would have just wanted faster horses. It's maybe looking beyond what is it they need, what is actually making them make that decision. What do the customers want? Henry Ford's customers just wanted to get places quicker. They didn't care if it was a horse, they didn't care if it was a car. So we tried to look at the marketplace and say there is a need for a company with an established relationship and trust in dealing with assets to actually bridge that gap. So we find ourselves in the sphere fighting with the Bitcoins of the world and the Coinbases to say, well, actually, we can provide a platform to store and to sell crypto assets. And we show them that by demonstrating our credentials in dealing with complicated assets. So Lucy had talked about the fact that this was going to be a mixed bag. So we're crypto assets and now commercial fishing vessels filled with £500 million of cocaine. What's the relevance? Well, it's part of our credentials. We're the National Crime Agency contractor. That means our contract says that you will manage all assets. We were high-fiving in the office when we won that contract, and then they come along a year later and say, but you also have to look after Bitcoins and crypto assets. So we very quickly then had to try and develop our own skill set. Now, the boat was sold for a couple of $100,000. We didn't sell the cocaine. I just point that out if this is being broadcast anywhere. But it gives you an idea of the looking at the customer's need. What was our customer's need in this instance? They didn't want to have to worry, the customer, the client, whatever you want to call them. They were dealing with an overseas fraud investigation. There was assets arising from that case. There was boats, there was drugs that had to be destroyed. There was crypto assets that had to be investigated, traced, and sold. So can we as a company expand our offering and then be able to give them all of the services? That for us is the tipping point. It's not saying who is technically the best at that job. If you can use your existing base. So the message really today is to say, look at what your own skill sets are. If you're in a startup, you're trying to introduce a new program or piece of business, your USP could actually be something you're completely disregarding. It could be a completely sort of separately removed asset that actually gives the customer that sort of comfort that you know what you're doing. Like I said, we're doing this now for Home Office, Revenue and Customs, Crown Commercial Services, and that's our contract is to deal with sort of seized assets. And that then has led to this little Northern Irish company 80 years ago, now being the largest independent auction house in the UK and Ireland, but being the only private sector company in the world that we're aware of that is managing crypto assets on behalf of government agencies. We're now the contractor for the Belgian government, for the Maltese government, and we put a lot of our success down to still being the people that they know and trust. We didn't sort of fill our company with external consultants, rebrand it, try and go off in a completely different direction and say, this is not Wilson's Auctions, this is sort of crypto or us. We tried to keep it and say, this is what we do. We manage seized assets. This is an expansion of our operations. And you already know us and love us for what we do with cars and land and property and houses and diamonds and the likes. Can we actually get involved in this sphere and actually do a little bit more for you? So it's just an expansion of your services. That's how we badged it. What we're known for is the selling of cars, the selling of houses, the bling. If you want to learn more about the company, for example, we're on BBC One for the next 3 weeks at 9:15, telling the story behind the criminal cases that then present crypto assets or other seizures that we then sell. And we're very confident that in only a matter of years, you will see in more and more criminal cases and insolvencies and bankruptcy cases that crypto assets are playing a much more prominent part. And a lot of our credentials come down to the fact that we're able to look at other complicated assets. If an agency will trust you to sell £2 million worth of gold bars, for example, what's the difference between selling £2 million worth of Bitcoins or other assets? As long as you can demonstrate an understanding of what you have to do, and most importantly, convince the insurance company. In our game, that's pretty much the biggest USP. You can have the greatest company in the world offering you services, but if they can't insure it, that was the biggest challenge around crypto assets. A lot of our conversations with Lloyds started off with, we need insurance for crypto assets. Great, what's that? Trying to explain to someone who has never been involved in fintech or involved in anything else, it seems silly. One of the most common problems we come across in dealing with sort of judicial matters in the UK is explaining to a 60-year-old judge or a QC, what is a Bitcoin? What is blockchain? We're trying to have those conversations, but also tie it back to something everyone can relate to, and actually tie it back to things like, it's just like gold. It's a commodity. It goes up and down in value. We can seize it. We can take it offline, and we can store it. It would be remiss of me to come to a tech firm and not talk about SciFi. I am more than happy to admit this is a stereotypical slide, one that I love as well. And this is one of the recent seizures we're involved in. A criminal in the UK who had the largest underground cannabis factory. Big fan of Breaking Bad. He bought an underground bunker. Lots of his guys went into it and they cultivated cannabis for a very long time. But instead of buying Rolexes and Ferraris, he spent over £500,000 on SciFi memorabilia. That is the actual car that was used in Back to the Future. That is Biff's hover car. He bought that for $25,000. He bought the replica Adam West Batboat, the replica Batpod, and all of these other assets. So they're all ill-gotten gains. They're all assets that have been removed from him, and then they've been given to us to sell. And the irony is, the process is exactly the same when we're dealing with crypto assets. How on earth do you sell the Back to the Future 2 used car? There's no manual for that. There's no market for that. What's your provenance checks? What documents? How do you market it? So we try and treat all complicated assets exactly the same. And it was demonstrating those credentials that then allowed us to be successful in tendering for crypto assets. So it's just really about an extension of your services. Give them the comfort that you can deal with that particular category. And thinking back to the Henry Ford example, how do you understand their motivation for wanting change? The customer isn't always right. The customer doesn't always know what they want. So it's really for us to take a step back and say, what's motivating their need to change their mind? How do we find that sort of entry point to say, well, actually, we've been doing a lot of this. We're quite good at this. Can we extend those services and do a little bit of that for you as well? And look at our credentials in dealing with change, dealing with or coming up with innovative solutions. So that's all we did in Wilson's to keep it as blasé as that. We looked at dealing with complicated and contentious assets and how do we expand into the next one. Quite frankly, when I see an instruction coming through to sell Bitcoins, that's okay. When I see a 500-ton cargo vessel that's lying in Aberdeen filled with asbestos and lead-based paint, and they say, you can't insure it, you're not allowed to move it, and please sell it in 30 days, give me a Bitcoin all day long. So we're going to talk a little bit more about Bitcoin. This is not a Bitcoin lesson. You're probably all far more educated than me, and I'm going to woefully simplify what our position is in this, but I'd love to talk about it in more detail outside once we're finished. So we've talked a little bit about our story as to what got us to this position. Working with law enforcement agencies around the world, we were asking us to seize and manage assets. And we often get approached and asked, but why Bitcoins? Bitcoins and other crypto assets, for those that aren't aware of crypto assets, I think there's nearly 2,000 now different cryptocurrencies. And obviously the most prominent announcement just a couple of days ago is Facebook's entry into the cryptocurrency sphere. So what we've been seeing for years now, over 2.5 years ago, we first sort of got into these conversations with law enforcement, was more and more criminals, as we all know, were using the dark web and dark net to buy and sort of carry out nefarious activities. We heard all of these stories about people buying guns and drugs online, people organising assassins and hitmen online, and all of a sudden, everyone now thinks Bitcoins and crypto assets are bad and they're dark and they're terrifying. Cash has been used in more drug deals and more hitmen and more fraud than any other commodity or asset. We are huge advocates of blockchain and associated technologies. We were invited to speak at the OECD blockchain, the world's first blockchain policy summit in Paris in September. We spoke at that event, and we've now been around the world speaking about crypto assets and trying to be a sort of voice of reason in a sea of the sort of human beings are just great big balls of anxiety, actually, when you think about it. And just trying to keep people calm and say, it's just an asset. It is used in illegal activity, but so is everything. So what we find is more and more now you'll see is that in criminal seizures, more and more assets, our asset pool is changing. It's almost like fashion. 2 years ago, no one had really heard of Canada Goose jackets. Now, in every criminal seizure we do, there's a Canada Goose jacket. There's a bottle of Creed aftershave. There's a couple of Louis Vuitton bags. There's a pile of fake stuff. We actually see the same trends. Criminals buy the same stuff as everybody else. So what we're now seeing is the same trend changing to crypto assets. And what we're learning more and more now is that people with no background in crypto assets whatsoever are also buying crypto assets as a means to launder money. It's not original, it's not a new concept, it's just a new way. We're seeing the conversations happening locally where people say, that's not really in my region, it's not happening here. There's Bitcoin ATMs in virtually every country of the world. A friend of mine who works in the UN, he had a comment on LinkedIn recently where he was at his son's birthday party in Vienna in a trampoline park that accepts cash only, and it had a Bitcoin ATM. So Neil, you're able to see in those sort of transactions how easy it is to be abused. The boring sort of stat, or in terms of legislation, is in January 2020, the 5th Anti-Money Laundering Directive comes in the UK, and that's been cheered as that's going to sort out the sort of dodgy cryptocurrency exchanges that exist. Sorry to say it's not. It will only regulate virtual currency exchanges that are actually registered in the UK. Once they step outside the UK and they're in someone's bedroom or they're set up on a server offshore, they're outside of the scope of regulation. So we think we're going to be very busy. We think that crypto assets, in terms of the asset recovery department in Wilson's Auctions, is probably going to be our busiest field. It's certainly the field that piques the most interest. Just 2 weeks ago, I was in Bosnia giving exactly the same conversation, where everybody's panicking and governments are sort of bringing us in to share our experience because we're one of the only private sector companies that manages assets on government agencies' behalf and actually deals with crypto assets. And we're trying to say to all of them, calm down, because they're worried about crypto assets and bitcoins when they haven't got a process in place for dealing with the car that's seized or the Rolex is seized, or they're making mistakes with regular assets. So we try and just sort of exercise a bit of caution and say, have a process in place and just relax and get on with your day. But more and more now we see criminals, when they're arrested, having portfolios of crypto assets, and that's where we come in then. These assets are seized. And if we put this alongside a Rolex is seized from a criminal and they find evidence that he has a crypto wallet of some description. Use Bitcoin for an example. So we have one Bitcoin and one Rolex. The traditional process would be seize both assets. But then in law enforcement, insolvency practitioners, solicitors, we saw a trend of all of a sudden dropping all the good practice that was done with the Rolex and then going to a virtual currency exchange to cash in the Bitcoin, and I'll explain that. So if you seize a Rolex and you want to get best value, if I was selling a Rolex today, I wouldn't walk into the middle of sort of the high street and ask the first person I see for a price on my watch and do the transaction. Don't check any ID, don't need your name, just take the money and off you go. If a law enforcement agency done that, it'd be all over the Daily Mail, we'd all be up in arms. But actually, agencies around the world were taking millions of pounds worth of seized crypto assets, logging onto crypto exchange, first result comes up on Google, and they go in, oh, this is Mt. Gox, this seems fine. And they're using more and more exchanges, and we continually see headlines around the world. And we're not talking about small amounts of money either. We're talking about 200 million, 5 million, 350 million, 530 million. So for those that don't know, these are the virtual currency exchanges where you can go, just like a foreign exchange, you can go with your Bitcoin and cash in your Bitcoin and cash out and get your local currency. All seems fine. But then think about the Rolex. The Rolex is sold at a public auction with people bidding all around the world online so that you can demonstrate best value. You can then do all of the necessary KYC, AML checks. You can make sure you know who you're selling to, just like the guys were talking about the startup. Who's investing in you? Coinbase's acquisition of Neutrino to then find out, oh, they've actually been selling hacking software to countries on the banned UN sanction list, and all of a sudden Neutrino's taken off the shelf. So it's about those types of transactions, about knowing who you're dealing with. And when we were working with government agencies and law enforcement, we were able to tell them, actually, you have a really good process for the Rolex and the Louis Vuitton bag, but what you're doing with crypto assets is going to get you stung. And we were right. not to sort of rub salt in the wounds, but it happened, and it continually happened. We've also seen other security breaches around the storage of crypto assets, because how do you store crypto assets safely and securely? How do we do it within our insurance regime? And for example, in the UK, if you're a drug dealer and you're arrested today and you're convicted, that maybe takes 2 years. You then have a thing called a confiscation hearing where they assess the value of your crime and seize your assets. That could be another 6 years. You then have to sell your assets. So you're talking anything from 7 to 8 years. We see this all the time. It's tragic. A Lamborghini is seized and it will sit stationary for 6 years. The legislation hasn't changed. No country in the world has legislated around the seizure and sale of crypto assets. It hasn't been done. Even cryptocurrency. Europol say, don't call it cryptocurrency. It's not treated as currency anywhere in the world. It's still treated as an asset. It's treated as property, effectively. So is it crypto asset? Is it crypto property? You can see all of the challenges that were in front of our clients and our vendors. And we decided, so the little company from Belfast originally, to say, well, can we now enter into this world? Can we sort of shake off the David Dickinson stigma of auctions? We've already done it with the drug boats. We've already done it with the Louis Vuitton bags. We valued a collection of Hermes Birkin bags in Malaysia, 267 Birkin bags. The most expensive, $180,000. This one lady had a £12 million collection of handbags. So if we're being entrusted to deal with things like that, can we do it with Bitcoins and crypto assets? So we understood, we analysed the things we've talked about. Law enforcement and our clients didn't have the hardware. The irreversible nature of Bitcoin transactions, it's called the immutability of blockchain. If something goes wrong, there is no Control Z, there is no undo button. So that's why they wanted to use us, because ultimately we had the security and the resources. So can we think of the gold earlier? Can we look at what we did with the gold and do the same with Bitcoin and just secure it in an old-fashioned, trusted way? Our marketing department and our guys had some suggestions. Should we be quite tacit about our security? Others said, let's really ramp up the security. We're going into the digital tech world. We need to do more things and sort of scare away criminals. We're going to get hacked if we store crypto assets. We're going to get hacked. We're going to get arrested. We're going to get locked up if we have gold bars. People will want to hijack us and put me in the boot of a car, I'm sure, if they think we have the keys to millions of pounds of diamonds. It's just another complicated asset. So we went for an old-fashioned storage, cold storage system. And this isn't all what if, maybe, let's do it. We've actually now been awarded this contract. So our first overseas contract was from the Belgian government. They wanted a company experienced in managing assets to come in and actually look after their crypto assets. But as I talked to you today, it was the same conversation with them. What do you mean an auction company can do this? So again, back to our theme, one of the 8 themes in Digital DNA this year is about innovation. Is about not being afraid to go right outside the box and try something different. So we reassured them of our experience in this field. And if you're selling crypto assets, for example, you're not selling in Belfast. Take a press release, translate it into every language you can think of, and have a dedicated marketing strategy, and then you can sell it anywhere around the world. So it allows a local company to think globally and then attract a bigger buyer base. And that's fundamentally our role in this. This was the location of our buyers at our last crypto auction, where we sold only £300,000 of the Bitcoin, not millions, just 300,000. But we attracted 6,500 bids worldwide. When the US Marshals last sold Bitcoins for Silk Road, there were 67 bids. It gives you an idea, because they had a sealed bid auction, an envelope-style auction, as opposed to something as simple as online. And that's all we did. A timed online countdown auction with KYC and AML checks. Very straightforward. Very easy to run, very easy to administer. We do it for 160,000 other assets a year. It's just an extension of what we were originally asked to do. Of course, in the background, you can imagine the pen testing, all of the complexities, all the things that went to ensure that we have the right technical platform when we're actually storing crypto assets, when we're adopting a cold storage, multi-signatory sort of process. How do we also make sure that we don't make the mistake when we're transferring the assets? Because that would be the most horrific thing of all. If we were actually instructed to manage the crypto assets, keep them safe for 6 years, and then sort of Dave in accounts says, I sent it to the wrong person. So that's obviously our biggest concern, is making sure that we carry that out correctly. It's also a bit of an urban myth for anyone that's sort of involved in crypto assets, this notion that you can press a button wrong and send it to the wrong place. There's check digits and so many things in place that you would have to do that incorrectly with about 16 digits randomly. I think they last said it's something like 43 million to 1 to actually hit the wrong button from the algorithms that are used. So It's not likely, but it does still concern. If you're a regular solicitor, insolvency practitioner, law enforcement agent, you do not want the responsibility of managing a portfolio of technical assets. So that's what we do. I thought I'll finish on an anecdote, and I think it sort of sums up what we're trying to do in Digital DNA as well, is how do you put a face to the faceless? How do you build trust where there is no trust? Think about Bob, and this is actually a true story. Bob's identity has been protected for the purposes of this slide on GDPR. His real name's not Bob. But Bob came to the auction, bought Rolexes, bought a couple of gold bars, and also bought 2 Bitcoins at the auction. Great. We were the only place in the world that we found out that bricks and mortar, you were able to walk in and buy Bitcoins in a legal way. Bar the ATMs, you can't buy Bitcoins. Please go and try. You have to go onto various exchanges and do different things. Actually walking into a building is what we do. So Bob bought the Bitcoins. We then asked him, send us your public address, 1 Main Street. No, your public address, your key. It's 1 Main Street. Bob didn't get that you needed to have a wallet or a public address. He then said, do you know what, just leave it, just put it in a bag, I'll come up and collect it. We're going, it's not a tangible asset. He didn't even realize what he was buying, but the message is that if you can embrace trust, build rapport, show them that you know what you're doing and bring them across, a little company in Northern Ireland that started off now can actually be dealing on a much bigger field. And that's the message I would leave you with. Don't be afraid to innovate, but don't forget about the person behind the decision. They're the little ball of anxiety that you need to reassure to help build your business and build trust in relationships. Thanks very much for your time, folks. And we're at the pod outside if you have any questions.